Season 3, Episode 19, Captain's Holiday. There's a goofy one. It's basically a Captain Picard Gets Laid episode. And I think at the time, Gene Roddenberry and Patrick Stewart had been pushing for Picard to have a little bit more romance in his life. In fact, I think Gene Roddenberry wanted background actors to simulate sex for some of the scenes in this episode. I think maybe Gene Roddenberry was losing it a little bit at this point. Needless to say, they ignored him on that one for a multitude of obvious reasons. And this is what they came up with. It's also the first Star Trek episode with Risa, the pleasure planet. Everyone goes there to get laid. It actually doesn't seem like there's much else to do there. I'm sure there is, but the main selling point seems to be come to Risa and make cumsies. I'm willing to bet that's what it says in the brochure. And with that, let's just dive right in, shall we? The episode opens up on Risa with a couple of weird aliens called Vorgons. And they have like fish gills for noses. It's kind of disturbing. And they're looking for Picard, but he's not there. But they seem to know that he will be there soon. And on the Enterprise, Picard is all worn out from a recent diplomatic mission. Riker congratulates him on his success, and Picard just kind of rudely grunts and leaves the bridge. So he's just a big fat grumpy pants right now. And Troy says he's stressed out. He needs a vacation. Crusher goes to see him in the ready room, and she encourages him to take some kind of shore leave. Picard says he hates vacations, and he thinks it would be better if he just used the holodeck for a while. But Crusher says no, he actually has to leave the ship. Everyone on the ship seems to be acting like kids trying to get their parents to leave the house so they can throw a party. And Riker suggests Risa. It will eventually be known as the top vacation spot in Star Trek. But Riker's talking about it like it's brand new. He calls it a paradise. And Picard is still not interested. But Troy puts the nail in the coffin when she says that her mother is coming aboard. And Picard, to his credit, sees through all this bullshit. He realizes that it's all just an excuse to get him off the ship. And they're just going to keep hounding him over it, so he figures he might as well go. And as he's getting ready, Riker says this.
Have I mentioned how imaginative the Risian women are, sir?
Too often, Commander.
So apparently Riker never shuts the fuck up about this place, which seems very Riker to me. And imaginative is an interesting word to use. The Risian women are imaginative. How imaginative? That sounds like a pegging situation to me. Either way, Riker's into it. And he asks Picard to bring him back a souvenir, something called a Horgon. So we got Vorgons and Horgons. It's absolute madness. And we'll talk more about this fucking thing in a minute. And Picard beams down, and he immediately gives a weird look to a woman who just walked past him. I guess because she's in some kind of skimpy bathing suit or something? I mean, if he's getting prudish about that, he's in for a big fucking shock. Because this place is cum central. A hooker hub. The Suck Citadel. And he bumps into a woman who says, "It's good to see you again," and she kisses him, seemingly trying to avoid some Ferengi onlooker. And Picard says, "I think you have me confused with someone else." And they part ways for the time being. And then Picard puts on his little Speedos and a poolside overcoat and decides to read his book in the sun. His real book. What can I say? He's old school. And a woman comes up to him and doesn't seem to really want to leave him alone. She says, "Why would you display the Horgon if you want to be left alone?" Picard says he just purchased it, which is another weird thing. Sometimes money is a thing in the Federation and sometimes it isn't. This is one of those episodes where it's a thing. And the woman says the Horgon is the Risian symbol of sexuality, and to display one means that you are seeking Jamaharon. And Picard says he doesn't even know what that means, and neither do I. We can assume it's just a fancy word for fucking. Pretty ironic that this thing is called a Horgon. It's more like a whore here. You walk around with one of these things and a whore just appears out of thin air. Women whores, man whores, whatever your preference, you show up with this thing and boom, you're in it up to your hips. So he covers the Horgon. He really just wants to read his book. And what he's doing really could have been done on a holodeck. He's just reading in the sun. So I don't know why he absolutely had to come here. Doesn't seem like Picard's kind of place. But I suppose that is the point. And a Ferengi named Sovak walks up to him. The same Ferengi from earlier. And he says some cryptic shit to Picard about some kind of disc that he wants, and he also tells Picard to stop working with the woman. He doesn't name her, but it's safe to assume it's the same one that kissed him earlier. And Picard gets frustrated, and he tells Sovak that he doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about, and he basically tells him to fuck off. Sovak says the disc is his, and so is the woman. And he leaves. And what a surprise, as soon as he leaves, the aforementioned woman walks up to Picard, and her name is Vash. It's a bit awkward, to say the least, because when she comes up to him, Picard assumes that she's just another Risian prostitute that thinks he's seeking Jamaharon. And she corrects him on that quickly, and Picard is embarrassed. Although I don't know why. I mean, she kissed him on the mouth a few minutes ago for seemingly no reason. You know, sorry for thinking you were a Risian hooker, but you did just make out with me a few minutes ago. If anyone should be embarrassed, it should be her. And Picard finally realized that she's the same woman the Ferengi was talking about. And once again, Sovak shows up. He accosts them one more time, and Vash discreetly slips the mysterious disc into Picard's pocket without him realizing. They ditch Sovak again, and Picard goes back to his room to find the fishhead folks there. They say they come from the 27th century. They've traveled back in time 300 years to find Picard. He asks what they want, and they say they're looking for something called the Tox Utot. Apparently, a visitor from the future left it behind on Risa centuries ago. It's a device that is capable of halting all nuclear reaction within a star. I mean, Jesus. Okay. And when criminals attempted to steal the device, its inventor hid it in the past. And Picard doesn't know anything about this shit, but they say that history recorded that he is the one who finds the Tox Utot. And when he finds it, they want Picard to give it to them so they can take it back to their own time. And Picard agrees to that, and they leave. Then he discovers the disc in his pocket, and he goes to see Vash about it. The story about the Tox Utot seems to be true. Vash says the disc belonged to a professor, and all his research notes on it are on it. And apparently it also contains the location of the Tox Utot, which looks to be in some caves just a few kilometers from where they are. Pretty convenient. So it looks like Picard and Vash are teaming up. They head out, and they immediately get stopped by Sovak, of course. Looks like they don't even make it out of the fucking lobby before he comes up to them again. He's holding a gun on them this time, and he reveals that he paid Vash to steal the disc from the professor. And instead of giving him the disc, she kept it along with his money. It's quite a revelation. And because Ferengi are never a threat to anyone, Picard manages to get the weapon away from Sovak, and he punches him for good measure. And you could also see Picard throw the phaser into the bushes, which seems wildly irresponsible. Why wouldn't he just keep it for the time being? I have no idea. Anyway, they make their way to a cave. I have no idea why they had to walk there instead of beaming, but okay. They take a rest, and Vash admits that Sovak did pay her to steal the professor's disc, but the professor died before she took it, so she doesn't really consider it stealing. I mean, what was the cause of death? Because she might be a murder suspect at this point. Who knows? And Picard doesn't flex his morality around her at all. He just seems impressed that she was able to swindle a Ferengi. Although something tells me he might have a different outlook if she looked like, say, a Lurian. Don't you? Just saying, I think her looks have a lot to do with the way Picard is reacting to her. And they break out a weird sleeping bag that is really looks more like a fitted sheet than a sleeping bag. And it also looks like it's made out of the Dink Dinks from Spaceballs. And they decide to sleep for the night, except they don't do much sleeping, because this is where shit gets smooth. Picard kisses her, and I don't know if they bang right here on the floor of this cave, but if they did, I imagine it would be pretty uncomfortable, even with the Spaceballs bedsheet. And the next day, or we can assume it's the next day, it's not really clear, but either way, they find the location of the Tox Utot. But there's some weird interference, and they can't pinpoint exactly where it is. So they just start digging randomly. And the fishhead fucks show up. Picard explains that they're from the future, and they're here to take the Tox Utot back to their own time. Vash obviously doesn't like that. And Sovok also shows up as well. He apparently found himself another phaser, even though he could have just picked up the one that Picard threw into the bushes back at the resort. And he says he found a copy of the disc in Vash's quarters. And Vash says she destroyed the copy, but Sovak managed to salvage it somehow. He tells them to keep digging, and the fishhead fucks are just standing there watching. They can't seem to find a fucking thing, and then they give up. And to show that just how threatening Sovak really is, he puts down his phaser and starts digging for it himself. A true villain would work smarter, not harder. And while he's doing this, Picard and Vash just leave. It's really hilarious. They get back to the hotel, and Vash says she wants to be alone. Suspicious. Picard leaves, and he gets a hail from Riker. They're in orbit above Risa, ready to pick him up, which is kind of crazy, because it seems like he just got there yesterday. And Picard tells him to stand by to initiate Transporter Code 14 on his signal. He goes to the lobby and finds Vash, all packed up and heading out. And Picard confronts her on her bullshit. He believes she's had the Tox Utot this entire time. And he asks her where she hid it. He also figures out that she wanted Sovak to follow her so he would see that it's not in the cave and give up on following Vash. She apparently already had found this thing by the time Picard even arrived on the planet. So she is pretty close to being a complete psychopath. She may not be a violent psychopath, but she's a psychopath. And this whole thing was just a ruse to throw off Sovak. And it turns out that she hid the Tox Utot in the fucking Horgons, in one of the Horgons on display at the hotel, which is kind of insane. Anyone could have taken it, especially since these are just these magic things that can apparently get you laid at the drop of a hat. It's a pretty hot item, is what I'm trying to say. And the Tox Utot just looks like this weird crystal-looking thing. Doesn't look like it's capable of halting all nuclear reaction inside of a star. It looks like a little knick-knack that you would stick on the back of your toilet. And Vash says she was going to sell it to the Daystrom Institute. So, there's no money in the Federation, but she was going to sell it to a Federation institution. It vexes me. I'm terribly vexed. And the fishhead fucks show up, and Picard is just going to hand it over to them. At least it seems that way. And Vash says, wait, how do you know you can trust them? Which is a good fucking point. It seems like Picard never really considered the possibility that they were lying to him about their intentions. They continue to demand it, and one of them shoots Vash, and she stumbles over like a drunken cougar who had one too many vodka lime sodas. Picard hails Riker and tells him to execute Transporter Code 14 with a 2-second delay. He puts his communicator badge on the Tox Utot, and it blows up. So apparently, Transporter Code 14 is blow up my communicator. Why? Why and how are my two questions. Like, how did the transporter act as an explosive I'm terribly vexed. I mean, if anyone has any thoughts on what the transporter actually did here, let me know, because I am confused. Also, that was not 2 seconds. It exploded almost immediately after he gave the order. The whole thing is really confusing because it seems like he was just going to give it over to them. And Vash said something, but at the same time, he told Riker to stand by on this transporter code 14. So it seems like he always intended to blow something up. I mean, it's a very weird ending to the episode. And the fishhead folks are frustrated. They leave. They say history records that Picard is the one who destroyed the Tox Utot. So that's nice. And Vash and Picard say their goodbyes. Picard says the Vorgons are time travelers and they may go back to a time where this whole thing started to get the Tox Utot. And Vash says, so he may be doing this all over again? Thankfully, no. There's no time loop here.
It's rhetorical nonsense.
And Vash also seems surprisingly okay with losing the Tox Utot, despite the fact that she apparently spent 5 years of her life looking for it. And all she got for her trouble was a Starfleet deep dicking. I suppose it was worth it. In any case, Picard beams up. He tells Riker that he wants to have a little chat with him about this fucking Horgon he requested. And Troy asks if it was relaxing. Picard says, uh-huh. And Riker said, I knew he'd have a great time. So they did it. The crew got Picard laid. A happy ending indeed. And I'm really glad Vash didn't get the chance to sell the Tox Utot to the Daystrom Institution. Because if she did, we definitely would have seen it in Star Trek Picard. So we can thank this episode for saving us from yet another mindless Easter egg. And we also have no idea what happened to Sovak. I guess he's still digging in that cave. He's a pretty dumb villain. But he's played by Max Grodenchek, who also plays Rom on Deep Space Nine. One of my favorite Deep Space Nine characters. So that's pretty cool to see. But overall, I think this episode is just okay. It's nothing special. It is fun, especially the first half. But it's also mediocre at times. And I'm not a big fan of Vash. I just never bought the connection between her and Picard. She shows up in Star Trek 3 times. And all 3 of those episodes are goofy as shit. It's kind of hilarious. But anyway, that's about all I got for now. Let me know what you thought of this episode. And until next time, take it easy.